You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramée.
And good day, good night. Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that is sometimes up to speed with Formula One. Mark, it's been a rough few weeks with the move to a new place and a brand new studio. You can now catch us live on YouTube, anywhere you get your podcast as well. Brand new studio with new audio, new sound, new equipment. And Mark, we have a brand new world champion as well.
Yeah, it was quite the way that things wrapped up there in Mexico last weekend. Of course, it's been, like you say, it's been a crazy couple of weeks. You've been moving. It seems everybody I know seems to be moving at this point in time.
In November, why? I don't know, but it's a reason.
Yeah, November's not usually the time of year that you expect to hear people are moving, but apparently it's a thing this year. But you did mention that we have a brand new world champion in, well, it's not exactly an old, it is an old face. It's not a new face, but it is Lewis Hamilton, who clinched having, well, it was not the way that we really expected it to play out in Mexico. There was a coming together between Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton in turn 3, and they dropped all the way back down to the bottom of the racing order. And Lewis didn't really claw his way back up to the top as much as Vettel did, but at the end of the day, just the points differential just was enough for Lewis to seal it. And 4 times world champion, an impressive accomplishment for the Briton.
No, it has been an impressive season for Lewis Hamilton, especially how they turned things around after a hot start by Ferrari and a lot of points racked up really early by Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton with some reliability issues at that point with Mercedes, and they finally found a way to turn things around and dominated the second and third quarter of the season really heavily. And the last quarter is basically non-existent competitively. But at least you get there's new narratives. Yeah, we knew Hamilton was going to win. It's been a few months now that we knew that Hamilton was going to win. But the narrative of, Verstappen literally becoming really strong now. And with the showing he did the last few races, with the win in Mexico, it does give some hope that next year Red Bull might be closer to the Mercs than we think.
Yeah, and I think you raise a couple of good points here. I think that if people that maybe have not been following the entire year take a look at the way that things are wrapping up right now, Mercedes win the Constructors' Championship, Lewis Hamilton wins the Drivers' Championship, they might think, well, gosh, this is the reason why I'm not watching Formula One, because it's status quo and it's just Mercedes blowing everybody away. But as you say, there's been several interesting storylines developing, not just from the beginning of the season, but throughout the season. And I guess the one real interesting one is when you had Ferrari kind of come out of really nowhere to really challenge Mercedes in the first half of the season. And like you say, since the summer break and since Monza have really tailed off, it's been the Red Bulls that have really sort of picked things up. So, sure, we know who the world champion is for this year in both the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship, but it really leaves a lot of questions on the table. What's it going to be like for next year? How competitive will Ferrari be? Have Mercedes figured it out? Have they got that edge on everybody else again? And have Red Bull rejoined the top 2 or 3 instead of being that kind of bridge between Ferrari and Mercedes to everybody else?
No, it will be fascinating. And next year, we're not expecting a lot of changes in the hierarchy of Formula One heading into next year. I think the Mercs, Ferrari, and Red Bull will be probably in that order, but the differences between each other will be smaller. The gap will be smaller. And I think the gap with what might be known as Force One, or I don't know what name it will have, but the team maybe formerly known as Force India next year will have maybe some competition for fourth as well with Renault, with the rise of Renault, right? And you never know what can happen. There's crazy rumors, Mark, today. Like, those rumors are not founded whatsoever. But there was even a rumor today that Porsche bought Red Bull Racing, you know. You never know what can happen in the crazy world of Formula One. And one thing we know is going to happen this year, we're going to Brazil, so it's kind of interesting to talk about it. For the second year in a row, Felipe Massa will retire. And for the second year in a row, we will have a send-off in Brazil.
Well, this time it's going to be for real. And it was really emotional
hopefully.
last year when, I mean, that was just a bizarre race to begin with. I mean, it was absolute torrential rain in Sao Paulo, and they stopped the race. Well, I can't even remember how many times now, but it seemed every time that you'd bat an eye, there was a red flag for one reason or another. But yeah, it was Massa who came out of that final turn and got a little bit loose and put his car into the wall and had that really memorable long and slow walk from basically the beginning of the pit lane all the way back to the Williams garage.
With every mechanic's
flag
out clapping in the pit lane while Felipe Massa's walking down. It was almost too much. I was almost like, all right, enough already. Back to racing, you know.
It was a rather interesting and unique moment, and I wonder if he'll get a similar treatment this year. It'd be like everybody give him a thumbs up or something. You know, Felipe, we did this last year. We love you, but you know, we can't do this can't do this each and every year. But
yeah, you overstayed your welcome. We did it last year. Come on, we can't do this again. Come on, let's go. Good job, but move on. Go home already.
Yeah, well, it really begs the question too: who will get that second seat for Williams next year? Is it going to be Lance Stroll and somebody else? Is it going to be two completely new drivers? So it'll be really something to watch over the next couple of months, or perhaps they'll have an answer sooner rather than later.
Maybe Lance Stroll, Robert Kubica. Maybe that seems likely at the moment.
Well, I mean, the Kubica rumor has really sort of been out there for a long time. And I mean, he's certainly answered a lot of questions as to whether or not he's strong enough and fit enough to drive a Formula One car. And I mean, he's done a number of tests over this past year. I mean, he was a very good driver in Formula One in the time when he raced there. Not really all that long ago, if you think about it, but considering the quantum leap that Formula One technology goes through almost on a yearly basis, the amount of time that he's been out of the sport is, you know, obviously very substantial. But if he's competitive, as his lap time seemed to suggest, and all the positive feedback that you've got from teams like Williams and Renault also seem to suggest that perhaps Robert Kubica back to Formula One with Williams is not perhaps the biggest stretch of the imagination.
No, I wouldn't be surprised if it happens, or a Paul Di Resta maybe, who impressed a lot of people this year when he was asked to take over Felipe Massa's car when Felipe was ill, and he was able to perform decently in a car not suited for him whatsoever, and being away from a Formula One car for a few years. So that was impressive. And speaking of impressive, I've been impressed by Brendan Hartley the last few races for Toro Rosso. And what's going to be interesting is him, maybe next year with Toro Rosso, with a brand new lineup of maybe Pierre Gasly and Brendan Hartley for the entire season. Well, that could be possible. So, you know, a lot of driver change in the silly season, which has already begun, to be quite honest, for a few weeks now.
Well, it's a little bit unprecedented if you think about it. I mean, first of all, you had the whole Honda McLaren saga that sort of ended up being, well, the way that it sort of played out eventually, this big drama was the Honda engines are now going to be supplied to Toro Rosso, and McLaren get the Works Renault engines in return, and they also get Carlos Sainz on a loan deal basically, and they boot out poor old Jolyon Palmer, who's kind of had his Formula One career on life support basically for the better part of a year and a half.
For its
he's
entirety,
really hung in there.
Like ever since it started, his career has been on life support. Poor Jolyon.
Yeah, exactly right. But I mean, that was a bit odd as it was. But when you look then at what was happening with Sainz's old team, Toro Rosso, you have almost this revolving door of late season auditions. You get Danny Kvyat, who gets dropped again from a Formula One team. I guess he's about the only person that I think I've ever really known of that's been dropped by two different Formula One teams in 2 different years.
I know one guy who likes when Kvyat gets dropped, and that's Max Verstappen. That's the third time. It's the third time that it happens where Kvyat gets replaced for a Grand Prix, no matter the reason, either gets demoted or replaced, and turns out Verstappen wins that race. Twice this year, once last year.
Yeah, and I would think that if there was ever any doubt that definitely Max Verstappen will never receive a Christmas card or a birthday present from the Torpedo, because, I mean, his career in Formula One obviously seems to be completely over now, which seemed to happen rather rapidly, because if you think back as recently as the British Grand Prix in the middle of the summer, there was suggestions then that the Toro Rosso were looking to either extend his current deal or work out a new one for him for 2018, and at this point, at the beginning of November, only a couple of months further down the road, it looks as though he is completely done in Formula One. But as you say, the guys that have come in, Pierre Gasly and Brendan Hartley, have both impressed in the races that they've put in for Toro Rosso. But that was rather odd in Mexico, the way that it kind of played out with the qualifying, with the cars blowing up and Gasly not even getting into the car, and then sort of sitting there on the pit wall watching the television, only to pull on his overalls to run back into the garage to look like maybe he was going to get out there and drive, but then actually didn't. So that was a bit strange. But yeah, the pair of them have been quite interesting to watch, and it seems that there is little room for patience in Formula One now, just not only with those teams, but perhaps all the way around now. I mean, winning and scoring points is just such a huge, and obviously, I mean, this is a huge understatement that I'm about to make, but I mean, it's huge business. And I mean, the difference that a single point can make is literally, for some of these teams that are on the cusp, the bubble, the margins of Formula One, can really make the difference of getting that lucrative money that you can get from scoring points in the Constructors' Championship, and not being in business. I mean, we look at Sauber. Was it Sauber last year or Manor Racing? No, it was Sauber, wasn't it? That sort of just missed out on the points.
Yeah. Was it? I forgot. It's too late. I forgot.
Yeah. Well, they just kind of missed out on a single point, and it really makes a huge difference. And I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot, but millions and millions of dollars here or there.
Oh, yeah, I remember
which sounds like a
I remember British American Racing in their first year, 2001 or something, 2003. Anyways, first year of BAR. I remember how they didn't get that 1 point, and basically, if you have one constructor championships point, you get like your traveling expense or something like reimbursed or something. It's like hundreds of millions of dollars, or back then it was that much. Now it's 20 or something, but still, that 1 point makes it a whole lot of difference.
Oh yeah, it's huge, and those costs, just transporting the cars and getting around the globe from track to track, is a massive expense. I mean, we all think that it's huge costs that just go into developing the cars, and of course that is, but there's also the fact that they need to go from the factories to literally all 4 corners of the earth. And they can literally traverse back and forth, which I always think is just kind of weird here just to go on a bit of a tangent. When you have these sort of different theaters that they go to throughout the year, they'll have like sort of an American portion and then an Asian portion, a European portion. But you have the Canadian Grand Prix kind of sandwiched in there between the Monaco and Spain. And it's just kind of funny how they kind of traverse back and forth. And somehow Montreal fits into the European portion of the schedule. That's the way that they hop around there.
That's because Montreal is a very European city, right?
That's true.
That's why they want to put it in there.
That is correct. So
let's just talk about Lewis Hamilton for a second. Because Lewis Hamilton himself labels 2017 as his hardest title in his F1 career, his 4th. Is it true? Is it a recency bias? Do we forget that the dog days of McLaren, it wasn't necessarily easy for him when he got those championship, and the one with Mercedes, yes, it was a little easier and a big domination by the Silver Arrow. But let's not forget, when he first started to come on the scene in 2007, it was not necessarily that easy. In 2008, his first championship wasn't a given as well. Is he right by saying 2017 is the hardest of his F1 career?
Well, I think he definitely makes a very good point. If you look at the difference that this season started, I mean, obviously over the past couple of months, Mercedes has been much more dominant than Ferrari. I mean, Ferrari largely defeated themselves. I mean, it's a combination of lack of reliability. They had problems with some of the errors that their drivers made, and they just lacked the pace at certain points. But if you go back, I think, as far as Australia, I think that Ferrari really surprised a lot of people, and just coming right out of the gate with all this speed, and were able to really, I think, beat Mercedes at their own game. And of course, Sebastian Vettel winning that first race was completely unexpected. And then it basically went back and forth. You had Vettel winning one race, then Hamilton, and then Vettel again, then Bottas one in between there. And it really went like that basically up until the summer break. And then it's really turned around for Ferrari after that. They came back at Spa, and obviously they just weren't quite good enough to match up with Ferrari. And then it just got worse from there. And Mercedes, all credit to them. I mean, they clearly were just a little bit behind Ferrari at the beginning of the season. And for them, I think that Monaco was just a real rude awakening, because you had Ferrari that won that one. And, well, I mean, there was that controversy of team orders and with Raikkonen and Vettel and all that. But still, it was they were just not really anywhere in contention for that one. But they went away from that race, and they worked hard over the next couple of weeks, and they came back to Canada, and they were much stronger. I think right then, when we saw in Canada Lewis tying Ayrton Senna's career best pole positions, then winning the race, setting track records, I think the gauntlet had really been thrown down. So I know that we really focus on the latter half of the season, specifically after the Italian Grand Prix, that is, where Ferrari's problems started. But I think the indications were as far back as Canada, even though that Sebastian Vettel did manage to win the Hungarian Grand Prix. But of course, he managed to do the wise thing, or got the good fortune of being in front of everybody else, and dodgy steering notwithstanding, that's just what he needed to stay in front. And since then, I mean, he hasn't been on the top step of the podium. And where Ferrari was kind of going back and forth with Mercedes, it's been Mercedes and Red Bull, and specifically Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, that have won all the races since the summer break. Mostly Lewis, but Max has won a couple there as well.
Yeah, well, to be quite fair, I'm actually surprised by the amount of wins Max Verstappen got in 2017. If you look at all the bad luck that he had all season long, he was actually able to get a lot of points in the last few months to make a decent season and be quite a challenge for his teammate, at least, in the battle for points for both Rebels. But I just want to touch on one thing, Mark. We made it almost 20 minutes into the show without talking about the big bombshell that came out last week with the big threat by Sergio Marchionne that maybe if the plans stay the same for the 2021 engine plans, maybe Ferrari will quit Formula One altogether.
Well, that's interesting, and of course, Marchionne has mentioned that, and then Bernie Ecclestone, former F1 Supremo, has kind of underlined that and echoed that sentiment, which kind of really seems like a typical Ferrari move. Formula One, of course, is just about as much as politics as it is what happens on and off the track in regards to the development of the cars and the racing and all that as well. But the reading between the lines, it just seems to me that although I like the suggestions and some of the proposals that they have, which is the 1.6 V6 turbo lead, or sorry, the 1.6 liter V6 turbo hybrid, higher revving engine, so 3,000 RPMs higher revs to improve the speed range and improve the sound, which is everybody's complained about since these new hybrid turbos were introduced in 2014. They want to make them simpler. They want to make them less complicated, so there would be no MGU-H and a more powerful MGU-K. So, I like the ideas behind them, but basically, if you read between the lines, that if the new engine rules for post-2020 are not in a format that Ferrari really think that are going to benefit them, then they're basically going to walk away, which I think is kind of interesting, because if you hear, say, Christian Horner from Red Bull,
they're happy.
He's been they're quite happy with the proposals.
Yeah, because it leaves the door for Aston Martin to build their own engine and to give it to Red Bull. That's the whole plan. You cut costs in the engine building. You have more manufacturers, or at least more companies building F1 engine, and that's why Ferrari might quit, or at least threatens to quit, is you undermine their advantage that they have with the knowledge and resources to build engine by putting restrictions in there, and then they cannot take advantage of being Ferrari to build a Ferrari. They can't take advantage of the fact that they have a better know-how, money, and a better assembly line, basically, to create engines. They can't take advantage of it because there's going to be a cap on cost in engine if things stay the same for 2021.
Yeah, and I think it's like I say, I think it's a sort of a typical Ferrari move, and they might just use their whole history in Formula One and just the clout that Ferrari has to get things that are it's all posturing, I think, and just trying to get some more favorable circumstances that they want. Or
what
to see
about the rest of the teams?
What
about the other 9 teams? What about them? Maybe it's better for them to have a more open paddock, like a more open engine, like your regulations to make sure there's a more competitive engine than just the Mercedes and the Ferrari engine, you know? If you make it in the fact that you can't spend too much on engine development, and you have to keep the engine at a certain amount of cost, whatever how they get to it. If it's more streamlined to make an engine, and you have a Aston Martin, the Porsche, or other companies that are looking into the possibilities of building engine, even the American companies are starting to be like, well, you know what? If 2021 comes around and we agree with the regulation, why not? You want the why nots. You don't want the nah. You want teams to come in. You don't want teams to come out, right?
Well, that's the thing. And the more teams and more manufacturers that are there, it just makes it more competitive and just makes a more, I think, a better environment for the sport. Because like you say, like right now, the 2 real big engines that manufacturers that are out there are Ferrari and are Mercedes. And of course, if you have anybody that doesn't have their own engines and they're looking to buy customer engines, then of course everybody's going to put their hands up for Mercedes when they're asked which engine would you rather have. I mean, they obviously have the power. I mean, look at so many times this year, like look at the Williams FW40, which is obviously a car that is really disappointed, but they just don't have the speed in the corners. But you've seen that sometimes when you get a guy that's stuck behind Lance Stroll or Felipe Massa, might be really close up to them in the more technical, the slower parts, the twistier parts of the circuit. But once you get back onto the longer, faster stretches, those Mercedes engines just give the extra legs to the Williams cars, and they're able to pull out those gaps. And that's why you see cars getting stuck behind guys like that for a long period of time. But, you know, it would be, I think, a more competitive environment. I think largely the new regulations this year that we've seen have worked. I mean, you look at the number of drivers that have won races this year. I mean, you have, I think, a lot more than in previous years. Of course, it's not really spread beyond the 3 usual suspects that you could say. But I think that at the beginning of the year, I don't think, like I was saying earlier, I don't think anybody expected Vettel to go out and win in Australia. And then it kind of went back between himself and Lewis Hamilton. Then you had Bottas in there. Ricciardo surprisingly wins 1 in Azerbaijan. And then you have Max Verstappen throwing his hat into the ring there as well. I mean, it would have been nice to see Kimi Räikkönen be able to really challenge more for race wins. And I think that's obviously why he was very ticked off, to say the least, in Monaco, when there was that whole question about the pit stop orders and the Ferrari tactics on that day. But it would be a great thing to see. But I know I'm sort of going on here a little bit. You were saying there's this rumor that perhaps Porsche has bought Red Bull. That would be interesting, because there are these rumors or these suggestions that because Aston Martin is going to be their title sponsor next year, that is kind of leaving the door open for them to either take over Red Bull or start their own works team or an engine program. So
yeah,
that is a very, very interesting rumor.
The engine program has been very heavily rumored for Aston Martin, and let's just put it this way. There was some hires of people with engine experience in Aston Martin and in the team with Red Bull. So, like, it's a very, very not well-kept secret that Aston Martin might be the fallback option for Red Bull in 2021 with the lack of other terms, because sooner rather than later, Renault will be like, you know what, our engine's so good, we'll keep it for ourselves, and ta-ta. And eventually, you'll have maybe other options depending of 2021, and if it's 2020 before, because Red Bull might need that 1 year. But that's one thing for the future. Mark, it's been a few weeks we didn't do a show, and we're not going to dwell on the next few races too, because while the Drivers' Championship is decided, the Constructors' Championship has been decided as well. What I'm asking you, Mark, is there's 2 races left in this season. What gets you excited? What are you going to watch for in those 2 races? Is there anything different now that we know who is winning both titles that you would expect for, or at least that you would pay attention to in a race?
Well, I think it sets up a lot of things for next year, and I think that it will be interesting to see, number one, how Ferrari finishes the year. Sebastian Vettel says that they want to finish the year in a manner that they deserve. So I think he's going to be very motivated to go out there and win those last 2 races. And Lewis Hamilton, just being Lewis Hamilton, I think, is not going to go out there and cruise around for the last 2 races, even though he has been crowned world champion. I think that after especially what happened at Baku at the beginning of the summer when Vettel did that whole bizarre wheel smashing incident after he thought that Hamilton brake tested him behind the safety car, which was not the issue. I think that has really put a fire in Hamilton's belly that I don't think that he doesn't want to see a situation where he's going to lose to Sebastian Vettel. I think that he wants to do everything he can just to remind Vettel who the best is. And Lewis Hamilton is the best. I mean, he's got just as many world championships under his belt as Sebastian Vettel does. And he's got the better of the 2 cars. And I think that Lewis will really want to underline that. Also, Mercedes is going to be trying out new design concepts for 2018 in the last 2 races of the year. So that'll be interesting to see what they're going to implement into the car and how that may affect the performance of the W08, either for the better or for the worse. Of course, the other topic that hasn't really been discussed very much over the past several weeks is Lewis Hamilton's teammate, Valtteri Bottas. Of course, he only had a 1-year deal with an option for 2018 for Mercedes. And I don't know. I mean, he's really backed off. He really hasn't been as good as his teamate has since the summer break. So, I mean, that could be a question of maybe Mercedes putting all their eggs in one basket and really focusing on Lewis. But I mean, in this day and age,
I think it really seems when Valtteri realized that, yeah, I'm driver number 2. Yeah, yeah. He hasn't said it openly, but yeah, I'm treated as driver number 2. I'm driver number 2, and well, before long, I'll start acting like driver number 2.
But the thing is now, I mean, you look at the situation that they had, sometimes a toxic situation between Hamilton and Nico Rosberg over the past several years. But the thing was, I mean, Nico did win quite a lot of races when he was a Mercedes driver. And of course, he won a world championship, not as many as his former teammate Lewis Hamilton. But if you look at what Valtteri Bottas has done, has he done enough to deserve that seat again in 2018? And if not, who do you give that drive to? That's a great question. I mean, is there anybody else out there at the moment in Formula One that would deserve that seat? Or is it just because you look at different teams and different drivers around the grid and how basically everything is set, does he just get that seat now by default? Is there anybody better out there? Or do you think that they may look at a situation and let him go or not pick up that option for next year, and then maybe bring up one of their younger drivers like a Pascal Wehrlein, who was sort of, but not really in the conversation last year.
And you know what? The Verline ship is sailing quite fast. He's not gaining anything by driving for Sauber.
No.
The last 2 years, like, his reputation hasn't got any better. It actually got maybe a little worse. And his future hasn't got brighter by driving for Sauber for 2 years.
No, it hasn't. But is not Esteban Ocon also a Mercedes driver? I'm not sure if he is.
Yes,
I can't remember off
the
top of my head. So,
yes,
I mean, there's the possibility there. And I think he's had an excellent season. I think that he's maybe flown under the radar a little bit. Of course, he got a couple of races
he's consistent. Like, he's not going to finish top first every time, you know, but he's consistent. He'll be like 8th, 7th, 6th, 4th, once or twice, but then go back to 7th. But just consistent, like always there, reliable.
Yeah, that's a very good point that you bring up, Kevin. So I mean, that is another situation, and of course, I guess you could the final thought that I have just to sort of round out this discussion on the last two races is this: are we going to see more of the status quo that we've seen over the past couple of months? Will Max Verstappen be able to win a couple here at the end of the season? Is Ferrari going to be able to pick it up? Is Ricciardo going to maybe be able to find an answer to his teammates? So I mean, there are plenty of things to watch and get excited about. Of course, the big one that everybody really focuses on, of course, is the Drivers' World Championship. But to think that just because there's two races left and Lewis is the world champion and there's nothing to watch, yeah, you know, I don't really buy that at all. I think that there's plenty of good things to keep in mind and really watch over the past, not over the past, but for the last couple of weeks of the year. I mean, just think about it. In 3 weeks from now, we'll be heading into the dark days of winter, and even winter testing is still a long ways off. So it's been it's a long season when you look at it.
But it goes quickly. It's a long season that goes by quickly. You know, to finish this show, Mark, I want to talk about one thing. You mentioned it earlier on. We have 2 4-times world champion in Formula One right now, as we speak, active drivers, Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton. And this is the rivalry of the last few years, and it seems it's going to be the rivalry of the next few years as well. One thing that differentiates both is at least Lewis Hamilton was able to win with 2 different teams. Meaning that he had to adjust, meaning he had to learn to win with different people, surrounded by different people. Yeah, some of them were the same, some of the engine people, and working with McLaren Mercedes back then, we're working with him with Mercedes. But Sebastian Vettel won with Red Bull, never won with Ferrari yet. Yeah,
it's it's one of those things, right? I don't know. It's I think for me, like Sebastian Vettel, I think that really let an opportunity slip. I think that's what we saw earlier this year at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix when he had that lapse in judgment. It was just really signaled, I think, just what was going on in his head. And I mean, he had a great package. He had a great team around him when he was at Red Bull. I mean, you would think that being at Ferrari and having all the resources and all the money that they have to put a winning car together, it just seems kind of strange that he's been there for a couple of years now, and this is the closest that he's got to a world championship. So whether or not he'll be able to get one while he's there, I mean, obviously he thinks that that they're the team to be with. I mean, I don't think that he really had another choice to go anywhere else after this year had he not got a new deal done with Ferrari. So that's a great point and an interesting one. I think that obviously Red Bull was a very successful time in Vettel's career, and the Ferrari one still remains to be seen what happens. So
was it all Vettel? Was it all the car? It's tough to say, and it's a question that will be. And you know, that rivalry, and we'll probably dissect that rivalry in the next few years. You know, for sure, it's one of the great ones for sure. But I think it's interesting at least pointing out that yes, Lewis has a lot of detractors because he doesn't necessarily do things the way our uncles would imagine a F1 driver should do things, and sometimes go out more than we would go out. But we're not him, and well, it works for him. Who are we to judge him if it works for him?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's kind of interesting, too, when you look at a guy that's won 4 world championships, and you have 2 of them that are currently racing in Formula One, in Vettel and Hamilton, that Hamilton gets these sort of plaudits thrown his way, that he's one of the greatest of all time. And I haven't really heard that mentioned about Sebastian Vettel. And I mean, hands down,
that Red Bull was that good, Mark. I'm sorry. Just that Red Bull was that good.
It was, those cars were excellent, but Lewis Hamilton is a special driver. There's no doubt about it. And you take a guy like Lewis Hamilton and the talent that he has, and you put him in a car like the Mercedes, and even in a Mercedes that may be not the best compared to some of the other competitors out there, he's still going to get everything out of that car and more. And when you get to him in that Mercedes, when it is tuned and it is operating to its full potential, that is an unbeatable package. And we saw for all those years when he was teammates with Nico Rosberg, just even how he was better than Nico. You look over now over the course of the year that just how much better Hamilton is than Valtteri Bottas. So I think I agree with you. I think that those Red Bulls that Vettel had were really just that good. Vettel's a good driver, but I don't think he's the same class of Hamilton. I think you have Hamilton. I think you have Vettel just a step or so behind, and then I think you have kind of everybody else after that. So
yeah, there's a gap.
Yeah,
there's a sustainable gap. There's a Verstappen, Ricciardo. There's another gap, and there's the rest. Yeah. Yeah,
well, I think that Verstappen is definitely proving that he's getting closer to guys like Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton.
Is it too early to say that Verstappen will be world champion one day?
He sure looks like it. Those last several races, and especially the races that he's won in the past 2 months, the guy's only just turned 20, and
and he's still being nice. I think that's the one thing. He's still being nice now. If you jab him, he's going to jab you back in a press conference, right? If you make fun of him, or if you're trying to bully him like a Vettel did before, it's like, what is this guy doing? What is he doing? He's not taking it anymore, and he's standing his ground. And well, he is now more confident too, and it's going to be dangerous if you're not Verstappen. If you're Verstappen, you're going to win. If you're in Hamilton, you're looking at your rear view mirror, and you're thinking, that kid's going to be fast.
Well, especially if you get a wet race like we saw in China earlier this year. I can't remember how many spots he made up on that opening lap after starting back on further back on the grid. Of course, everybody talks about Brazil last year, which was an absolutely epic drive by Verstappen, passing in any part of the circuit that he could and finding grip where nobody else could. That was absolutely phenomenal. And then, of course, we've seen him just, he'll pass anybody, anywhere, anytime. And if you leave even just a tire width extra that gives Verstappen what he thinks is going to be an opening to get around you, he's going to try, and 9 times out of 10, he's going to be successful in doing so. Or he'll drive into the side of you and rupture your radiator like he did to his teammate in Hungary. But, honestly, you don't see that all the time from Verstappen. I know he kind of pushed Nico Rosberg wide at Turn 1 in Mexico last year. And, of course, he had that run-in with Ricciardo at Hungary this year. But, he's an aggressive driver. And, if he gets a look, he's going to go for it. And I think that's why people love him. That's what makes him an exciting driver. And he's got the pace. And like you say, I think if you're Lewis Hamilton, I think you're looking in your rearview mirror, wondering what's coming next. And if he could get a car that's similar to Hamilton, there'll be fireworks. Because I think Max is a guy just kind of like Lewis, that even if he's not in the greatest car, he'll be able to get performance and speed out of it that nobody else could. I think he's one of those special kind of drivers as well.
Mark, to finish the show, as always, where can the listeners find you?
They can find me on Twitter at MarkJRDailey, and that is Dailey with an L-E-Y. If they want to follow up to what we're up to on the podcast here, that's at Scuderia F1 Pod. And they can download the podcast in audio form everywhere where podcasts can be found. Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Google Play, all those good places. And of course, we're on YouTube streaming live, which is about time. And it's awesome.
Yeah, we're live on YouTube, and you can find the videos on Facebook as well, on the page of the Sports Podcasting Network. You can find us on Twitter at SportsPodNet, and myself at Kev Laramée. And Mark, as always, until next time, hopefully in the next week and a half, 2 weeks, probably. As always, have a great Formula One.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.